Yes, I can hear you, Dr.
All right.
Gabriel. Just
Thank you.
starting the recording.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so good day, colleagues. Welcome to the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg, the Critical Thinking, Argumentation, and Evidence-Based Writing Workshop. My name is Kweketso Bila, and I will be your moderator for today. And firstly, I would like to notify you that this workshop is being recorded. And please allow me to start by thanking all our attendees for taking your time to join us today in this workshop. And most importantly, I would like to thank our presenter, Dr. Gabriel Monera, for his effort with preparing and also giving this presentation. Before I can introduce Dr. Monera to you, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules and some of the important information. And for the housekeeping rules, so if you do have questions during the presentation, please, you can raise your hands if you would like to speak. Alternatively, you can write your question on the chat box, your question or your comment on the chat box, and I will then indicate to the presenter to address the question. And as I've already mentioned that this session is being recorded, so the recording and the presentation slides will be uploaded on our Moodle community by the end of the week. And a feedback survey will also be sent out during this session. Please, may we request that you fill the survey out so that we can get some insight on whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve moving forward, as well as to provide some kind words to our facilitators. This is used also for the facilitator in RCD reporting, and by completing the feedback survey, it will ensure that you also get the certificate of attendance. And just a reminder that we have recently launched the RCD management system, otherwise known as the RCDMS, and we would like to urge those who have not yet registered to please do so. And if you do need assistance with the registration and you're struggling, please send us an email on rcdinquiries@uj.ac.za, or you can, one of our colleagues, Mr. Lawrence Asani, is currently at the library assisting everyone, the APK library assisting everyone with the RCDMS registrations. So if you do have challenges and you are on campus, you can go to the library and go see Mr. Lawrence Asani, and then he will assist with the registrations. So without further ado, I will then introduce our facilitator, Dr. Gabriel Monera, by reading out his bio. So Dr. Gabriel Monera brings a wealth of experience as a former assistant lecturer, high school educator, and current research writing specialist. His research focuses on trade policy, export promotion, foreign direct investment, and regional integration in Africa. Dr. Monera is committed to helping researchers achieve scholarly excellence through effective writing. I will then hand over to our presenter, Dr. Gabriel. Over to you, Dr. Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pila. I just want to ask from the participants if just by show of virtual hand, if you can hear me well, and also if you can see these slides that I'm sharing with you. Just confirm by show of virtual hand if you can see those slides. Okay, I've got a thumb, which means you can see these slides and you can hear me well. Thank you so much for that, and thank you also, Ms. Pila, for the introduction. So this is a workshop that is part of a series of workshops that we sort of did this month under the theme Fundamentals of Research Writing. So you'll see that some of the things that we are going to talk about, if you have attended our sessions previously, including even the session that was held today and the two sessions that I conducted yesterday, you see that these issues that pertains to language, structure, in terms of academic writing. Let me just say the fundamentals of research writing, looking at them from an academic perspective, they are so intertwined. They are so intertwined that some of the things we still have to even repeat them, but in passing, for us to sort of appreciate the way in which these issues just feed into each other and they are sort of interwoven. So let me, just like I've said, I will be under this theme specifically for this session. I'll be looking at critical thinking, argumentation, and evidence-based writing. Okay, so this is the outline of the presentation. I've just clustered the conversation around those, themes, the key themes: critical thinking, argumentation, and evidence-based writing. But I also include how do you evaluate sources, issues of logic and fallacies, academic and academic writing, because we cannot divorce these elements from the other sort of fundamental issues that we are going to be focusing on. That with that I mean the critical thinking, argumentation, and the evidence-based writing part. Okay, so what is it that we call critical thinking, or what is it that we call argumentation, as well as evidence-based writing? So when you talk of critical thinking, we are simply saying this is a self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. So I'm quoting that from Paul and Elder, 1997. I think they have a sort of a framework that they came up with that addresses this issue of critical thinking. And I think as we move on, we'll have a chance to sort of look at that. So the critical thinking itself, it involves evaluating the quality of reasoning and identifying flaws in arguments, including your own. Right. So when you approaching text from a critical perspective, it is not about just being critical in a negative sense, but about being discerning and rational. And when you say discerning, we simply mean showing good judgment or insight, or being able to perceive and understand things clearly and intelligently, right? And by rational, I mean your argument should be based on reason or logic. You should not just argue for the sake of arguing. You should be able to think clearly, sensibly, and logically. But in terms of argument, it is not a dispute. It's not like you are fighting. But it should be a logical presentation of ideas that is supported by evidence and reason. Okay, so you must mark that logical presentation of ideas supported by evidence and reasoning. Argumentation seeks to persuade by appealing to logic. So these are the Greek words that are used for that, the philosophical terms. So when we talk of logic, we think of logos. That is the Greek term for that. Then ethics or ethos or emotion, which is also in Greek called pathos. Okay, so you seek to persuade by means of logic, ethics, or emotion. And when you look at evidence-based writing, it simply refers to constructing your arguments using research, data, and scholarly references. It ensures that opinions are informed and conclusions defensible. So remember, when you write in an academic context, everything, you cannot just make statements that are hanging and just leave them. You have to support your claims, your arguments. You have to support them with evidence, which can be in form of data, existing research. That's why we cite, isn't it? We cite why? Because we are supporting the claims that we are making. We are supporting the arguments that we are making. Okay, so this is what I think that by the end of this presentation, we should have sort of achieved. So the presentation itself, it will look more into the intellectual and practical skills essential for advanced academic inquiries, focusing on cultivating critical thinking, structuring robust arguments, and crafting evidence-based, persuasive academic writing. So I will give insights around just that are centered around these sort of key elements. Then for these competencies, we use them when you're writing literature review, research proposal, journal publications, or when you're writing your thesis or dissertation. So we, as long as we are writing in an academic context, then this we are bound to use it in one way or the other. Okay, so why critical thinking is important in postgraduate work? Why is it important? So one of the key elements is that it encourages intellectual independence, which is vital for original research. So as postgraduate students, we are actually expected to move beyond passive learning and become active contributors to academic in the conversation. You must be able to also be part of the debate, right? And with that, you will see that critical thinking actually promotes what we call intellectual autonomy. By that, I refer to the capacity to question assumptions, challenge perceived knowledge, and formulate one's own perspective, right? So, in other words, rather than just reproducing what others have said, you also apply your mind critically, right? So it will help you, being looking at text from a critical perspective. Actually, it helps you to construct original theoretical interpretations, engage in innovative research, and also to be able to develop your own original or novel hypothesis, right? I think this is it is essential. It is essential in producing, all those original theses or dissertations, or it could be peer-reviewed article. I think for those who have published it before, that the issue of originality, it cannot be overemphasized. The journal, the editor wants to see something that they are doing that is new, right? So it's only through critical thinking that you can be able to build hypotheses that are novel. You don't do what others have already done. So another important thing is that it enhances the ability to critique theories and methodologies. So you shouldn't just when you read a paper, then you just accept everything that they are saying. You should be able to criticize or to look critically, from a critical perspective, be able to review the methods that were used, be able also to review the theories that were applied. Sometimes the theories are not even applicable to that particular research, or the methodology that was followed is flawed in some way, or it is not even related to the research understudy. So you should be able to look at that. So critical thinking equips you with the tools to evaluate the validity, reliability, and applicability of theoretical models. So instead of sort of uncritically adopting popular or traditional perspective, a critical thinker can interrogate the assumptions underlying a theoretical model, question the epistemological stance or a methodology, and assess whether the chosen framework is appropriate for a given research context. So this leads to more thoughtful, rigorous, and well-justified academic choices. So you should not just take what everything that you get. Look at it critically, engage with the whatever ideas that are being put forward within the article, right? So I normally call it validation. I've presented before when I was talking about critical literature review. That is what I call validation. So you don't have just to collect facts and put them together. Collecting facts or just dumping facts, or building your own library by just collecting journal articles, books, then you pile them, So, but you have to look at text from a critical perspective, add value to the text that you are reading, Then it also improves decision making based on analysis and not assumption. So we will see that in postgraduate studies, decision making affects everything that we do. That is from research design, data interpretation to argument construction, and the selection of sources itself. Right? You have to decide that this source is applicable or not. And in that critical thinking, it fosters systematic and logical decision making by encouraging one to weigh evidence, assess alternatives, and anticipate consequences, right? So if you apply this analytical mindset, it will assist you to avoid what we call cognitive biases, resist oversimplification, and base academic decisions on evidence, right? Reasoning and relevance. So you have to think of that, is there enough evidence, for you to be able to base your decision on. All right. So sometimes people just maybe follow what they think is convenient for them, or what they think that is what is traditionally accepted. So if you have critical thinking skills, you are able to to be able to, when you are making any choices, you should be able to make those choices, defend the arguments that you are making, which could be wherever you are, sort of disseminating your research. It could be in seminars, it could be in conferences, and so on, right? And also, even when you are responding to feedback from supervisors or from reviewers, you should know that you are applying your mind on the text critically. Okay. So when we talk of cognitive biases, we are referring to systematic patterns of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment. Right. So sometimes you have to there are certain biases that are there. Then you overlook those biases. Um, you know, so that usually arises from the brain's attempt to simplify information processing, and in a way, it will just affect your decisions, your beliefs, and the your behavior as well, right? Then we have the issue of that it helps in navigating academic debates and complex context. And at postgraduate level, academic literature is often dense, abstract, and condensed, right? So critical thinking enables students to analyze complex arguments, deconstruct theoretical debates, and evaluate conflicting viewpoints. So I think this is important. Usually when you are writing literature reviews, when you're crafting arguments, and when you're defending research in oral presentations, for those usually who are doing PhD, you have to do a Fiverr where you have to present orally your research, to defend your research orally. So this is where critical thinking now becomes even more crucial in terms of helping you to navigate the academic debates and complex text. So these are the core elements of a critical thinking. I'm just adapting this from Paul and Elder's framework. So we have what we call intellectual standards that we have to be applied to elements of reasoning, right? For you to develop intellectual traits or intellectual characteristics. So under the intellectual standards, we have accuracy, we have clarity, we have relevance, we have logical sufficiency, precision, depth, significance, fairness, and breadth. Okay, so you are remember, when you are analyzing, this is an article that you are analyzing, so you are looking at it against measuring it against or judging it against these intellectual standards. The accuracy, of it could be the methods that were used, the information within the article, sources that were also used within the article. Okay, so when we talk of the issue of accuracy, you have to check if the information is true and free from error. Okay, it's your duty to do that. So you can ask questions like whatever that is being put forward, or the argument put forward, is it true? Or how could that be tested, or how can one verify that? So those are questions that you can ask yourself under accuracy. Okay, so in terms of clarity, clear thinking means being easily understood without confusion or ambiguity. We have presented that, and I've shared with you strategies that you can use to enhance your issues of clarity and conciseness, as well as precision in academic research. Then the issue of relevance. Is it relevant? What you cannot talk about certain things over time. Remember, concepts, theories, they do evolve over time. So you have to check the relevance of the information that you are applying. You can't tell us about economic growth of 1990, maybe when you want to tell us about that, about maybe the unemployment rate of today, right? Then you quote statistics that are coming from maybe 1990, right? So that is a long time ago, and those statistics, they are not relevant with, in the current context, but historically, you can use them for historical, as a point of historical reference, and also using them to sort of compare the current with the then, right? Then issues of fairness, significance, breadth. Then in elements of reasoning, we have purpose, inferences, questions, concepts, points of view that are being expressed, implications of the study or the arguments that are being made, including the issue of information, as well as assumptions that are being made, right? So we also have the under intellectual traits, we have humility, the issue of humility. Then we also have the autonomy. We have fair-mindedness, courage, perseverance, empathy, integrity, and confidence in reasoning. So you can go on further and just look at the meanings of these terms that I have I've added there. Of all the elements that I've added there. But in terms of intellectual humility, you are simply recognizing the limits of your knowledge and being open to new ideas and corrections. That is very important. So if you are a critical thinker, then you must have that quality. It shouldn't be only your way or your perspective, right? You have to consider the perspectives of others as well. In terms of perseverance, staying focused and determined in overcoming obstacles or complexity in thinking, right? So you can ask yourself whether are you willing to keep working through confusion and difficulty, or do you give up too easily, right? So when you look at critical thinking, it often requires sustained effort. Giving up leads to superficial understanding, right? Then, when we talk of intellectual autonomy, we are simply saying thinking for yourself and taking ownership of your beliefs and values. So you have to be able to think independently. So if you're not thinking independently, then you do not. That's one element that is important for one to be a critical thinker. So you can also think of whether you can you defend the ideas that you are putting forward, or the views that you are expressing. Can you defend them rationally? Okay. Then let me just look at the last one, which is confidence in reasoning, where you are simply trusting that rational thinking, fairly applied, leads to sound conclusions, right? If you fairly apply rational thinking, then you can it can lead to decisions that are conclusions that are sound, right? So you can ask yourself whether do you believe that careful reasoning can lead to the best outcomes. And by that, you see why does it matter? Is because the issue of confidence in reasoning motivates us to rely on logic and evidence over impulse or guesswork. Guesswork is never good in in academic research. So you see that if you are having these traits of critical thinking, these are you don't just have them automatically. It's something that you have to develop over time, cultivated through practice and self-awareness. Okay, so if you put them together, all these intellectual standards, elements of reasoning, and intellectual traits, they build a character for you, an intellectual character for you that it's based on application of standards and elements of thought with honest rigor and depth, right? So moving on to the structures of argumentation. So this is the structure of an argument. We have the introduction, we have what we call narration of the argument, confirmation, refutation, and conclusion. But this is the classical, sort of a traditional, or the Aristotelian, um, um, Aristotelian approach, or sort of a classical structure of an argument. So it's based on that. You have to introduce, within the introduction, you're simply engaging the reader and stating the thesis. So usually when you write at the end of the introduction, you state your thesis and you state your argument that you are in support of. So when we talk of a thesis statement, it's simply a clear, concise sentence. And like I've said, you usually find that at the end of the introduction. And that statement states the main idea of your argument or in the text that you are writing. Okay, so in other words, to just put it simply, we are simply saying it is the central claim or controlling idea that your entire piece of writing will support or explain. So you have to reveal your position. You have to state your argument there and show us your orientation already. Okay, so when you talk of narration, now you are providing a background and context to that argument that you are presenting. Then the confirmation, you move on to confirmation, where you present the main points, but also backed by evidence, right? Then the refutation, this is where you also address opposing views. So it's that like you are refuting your argument, right? So you provide counter views or counter argument, right? So after providing the counter argument, you still have to counter that counter argument as well. So that's the refutation part, that what we call refutation, where you have to also argue against the counter argument that you were making. That is now leading now to the conclusion, where you are now stating your position or summarizing and reinforcing the position that you have that you would have indicated that you are following. Then we have what is also called the Tolman model, which is based on claim, grounds, warrant, backing, qualifier, then rebuttal. So when you say claim, this is your assertion or thesis. I've explained what a thesis is. Then the ground, now you are providing evidence supporting the claim that you are making. Then the warrant is the logic that connects evidence to the claim. So we call that the warrant. Then backing, that's further justification of the warrant. Okay. So warrant, I said, is the logic that connects evidence to the claim. Okay. Then the qualifier, you have to also look at the degree of certainty. So some things they have to say maybe most likely or probably, that kind of wording that also take into consideration the degree of certainty. Then the rebuttal, those are anticipated counter arguments. Okay, so in most cases, you will see that people apply this Aristotelian model, or the sort of traditional or classical model, as well as this Tolman model. Then we also have the Rogerian argument. It's also known as invitational argument or collaborative rhetoric. This type of argumentation it is a non-confrontational style of writing an argument. They are not confronting. Okay, so in actual fact, you are encouraging collaboration. Usually begins by fairly presenting the opposing viewpoint. So you don't start by your point, but you start by the point of the one that you are opposed to, right? So in other words, you are aiming at building trust before introducing your perspective. Okay, so it focuses on finding a middle ground between the author as well as the audience. And this type of argumentation can be extremely persuasive. Okay, so this can also be applied in context in terms of the situation in which you are, making that particular argumentation. Whether do you seek to persuade, then you can apply this Rogerian argumentative style or approach. Okay, then these are the qualities of a strong argumentation. It must be clear and logically developed, must have a clear and logically developed thesis. It must be based on evidence that is relevant and sufficient, also credible as well. Recognition of limitations and counter arguments. You have to use a tone that is ethical, so avoid manipulation or exaggeration. So we tend to exaggerate the claims that we make. There's also issue of consistency, right? So no contradiction between parts. So you have to be consistent. You can't contradict yourself, right? Then, but why does, okay, let's now, we are moving from the issue of argumentation to the third theme, which is the evidence-based writing. And why does it matter? Okay, so the evidence-based writing, it reflects academic rigor and credibility. So you have to also show, like I said, you must join the conversation. Also, you have an interaction with existing, scholarship. That is, all those existing or extant, literature. Then you must engage with those existing sources, to show that you have extensively engaged with those with sources or with publications that are already existing within the topic that you seek to provide answers to. Right? Then it supports claims with proof and not assumptions. So don't assume. Don't give your personal opinions as support. You have to support by evidence that is credible, right? That is credible. If it's statistics, it must come from institutions that are reputable, or from organizations that are reputable, not based on your personal claims or your personal orientation. So this must be objective rather than being subjective. It also encourages transparency in methodology and reasoning, prepares writing for peer review and scholarly publication. So it's very important in the scholar realm that you have to provide evidence if you are to prepare and channel your paper towards scholarly publication. These are the types of evidence. So we have what we call empirical evidence, which is based on observation or experimentation. So these are, when you are reading in an article, this is where you see the results or statistical data. So that part that gives the empirical evidence, what you found, or what other studies are found, what other scholars found. So that forms part of empirical evidence. Then we have what is called theoretical evidence, which is derived from scholarly frameworks. An example, Marxist theory in literal analysis. We have many theoretical, sort of contexts that have been put forward, over years by scholars that have come before us. Then we have the textual evidence, which is based on close reading or document analysis. So that is police documents, primary text, then expert testimony, insight from specialists, quotes from field researchers. So those who are established and considered to be experts within your field or specialists within your field. Then we have also what is called expert testimony. Anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal evidence, it means it has not been sort of tested through research. Let's say that's something that has been not. These are just claims that they are making, but there's no evidence backing those claims. So these are personal or narrative based, least persuasive, reflective accounts of case or finance. So so we also sometimes certain things are based on an unverified evidence. So that is what we call anecdotal, and you can include that also when you are making that maybe this claim that I'm making is anecdotal, so it means it's not verified. So you have to indicate that. So don't present it as if it's verified, yet you know that it's not verified. So this is the source hierarchy when you are writing in terms of evidence-based writing. This is the source hierarchy. So we normally prefer the preference is that peer-reviewed journal articles are preferred over books from academic publishers, conference papers, reports from reputable institutions, web sources scrutinized. You have to scrutinize them yourself critically, and or media or opinion pieces. But this is also rarely acceptable. You cannot cite a media piece or an opinion piece maybe in your research, but it also depends from the field, where you are writing the research under, right? So, so this is the order of preference. This is the order of preference ranking. In a sort of ascending order, of importance from peer-reviewed to the media or opinion pieces, which you should actually, desist from if you normally use them, because they are not considered scholarly. Okay, the integration of evidence. So I've already touched on that when I said that you have to integrate the evidence. You don't have to just take information, then you throw it there. You integrate it. So which means an idea being supported by multiple sources, as well as yourself applying your mind as well critically, to the text, adding your voice to the text as well, or adding value to the text, right? So you don't just have to insert quotations or quotes and explain. You actually have to explain their significance. So don't just quote, then you leave it there. You have to explain the significance of that which you would have quoted. Then use signal phrases as well, according to as argued by, so that we know that this is an argumentative claim. Then also avoid excessive direct quoting. So the preference is that paraphrase. And when you paraphrase, it doesn't mean just taking the text from someone else's work, then you just change the synonyms and you say I've paraphrased. No, you have actually to change the sentence structure, right? Don't sing a different song but using the same melody that someone else have used before, right? It can be different, but still you are copying the melodical part. You have copied from another person. So you have to just you have to paraphrase. Always cite the source appropriately and also consistently, right? Then this is a way that you can use to evaluate sources. So I call it the CRAP test assessment, where the C represent currents, how current is that particular source. Then R is the relevance, how relevant is it to the context in which you are writing for. So undercurrents, you are simply looking whether the article is up to date and relevance. How well does it fit your research? If it's not relevant, then why even looking at it or reviewing that kind of a source? Then you also have to look at the authority, right? Under authority, who is the author? Are they credible? So the credibility of the author is also questioned. Only that when you're writing a thesis, you are providing 200 references. So I might not have time to check all of them, but I can scan one or two just to check the relevance of that, or even to check the whether where is that, if it's a journal article, where is it published? Is it a predatory journal, or is it a journal that is accredited? Do they follow a peer review process? Is it a blind peer review process? What are the other maybe editorial policies that they are having, and so on, right? So that can also be checked. So you just have to be aware that such can be checked. Then when we talk of accuracy, you are checking, whether the evidence that has been provided, is it reliable? So you have to check the methods, the method that was used, the sample size, and so on. Are they violating any assumptions of the methodology that they are following? Are the results reliable? You check issues of validity. Are they valid? You check issues of reliability as well before you just accept. But I know that a lot of times we just go on the internet, whatever source that comes first, we don't even review it against these measures that I'm presenting to you now. You don't even review it. You just accept whatever that they are saying, as long as it supports the claim that you are making, and that is wrong. Right. Then issue of purpose as well. What is the intent? Are they intending to inform, to persuade, or to critique? So it's important that you also look at the purpose of the article, of the text that you are assessing, right? Then we have the issue of also primary versus secondary or versus tertiary sources. So I always receive this kind of question during research writing consultations, that what do I do, in terms of the preference, if the primary source is there, then how do you cite? And there are also other students that face the challenge of lecturers maybe possibly saying that they need a particular, the sources must be this number of years old, right? Of which I actually argue that I think it should be contextual. If it's a historic concept that you are looking at, then it must also have historical sources. If it's the development of a particular idea or theory, then it must start from a sort of a historical base, then you take it further until the contemporary, right? So when you are having primary source, that is the one that is preferred. So go to the primary source, seek information from the primary source, and paraphrase it on your own, write it in your own terms, but draw the information yourself, right? So this with these examples, interviews, data sets, original research, because you can, if you are carrying out interviews, then that will become a primary source of information, isn't it? Right. Then that constitutes the direct evidence. Then we have secondary, which is literature reviews, critiques, or you go to a paper that someone else have written. Then this will form so analytical commentary. Then we have tertiary, where you consult encyclopedias or indexes for a general reference. But then the types of reasoning, I think this is not new to you. We have what is called deductive reasoning, then also inductive reasoning. So usually people, we tend to just distinguish the two in terms of the level of generalization, as in whether you're moving from to general to specific, or from specific to general, right? So if it's deductive, you move from a general rule to a specific case. Okay, I just inserted an example. If you say all mammals have lungs, that is a general, isn't it? So it's broadly applied. Yeah, broadly applying it. So the level of generalization is a high level of generalization. But now, if you move it from that to now within mammals, you are simply singling out the whale as a mammal. Then now, if you say a whale he has lungs. Okay, all mammals have lungs. Therefore, a whale has lungs. So we have moved from general to more to a specific case. Then that is deductive reasoning. Then we have inductive reasoning, which move from specific cases to general conclusions. Right. For example, if you say this professor is a harsh, then the next one might be harsh too. Right. So usually this also goes along with fallacies as well. The inductive one, the fallacy of composition. What's true for one is true for the whole. So if one professor is harsh, now you are saying everyone else who will come will also be harsh. So it's very much linked to the fallacy of composition. So this is also important within the study that you are doing. By now, I think since I have spoken about it, that usually from general to specific, then that's deductive. Then from specific to general, that is inductive. Then this is the one that we also normally do when we are doing writing our research, is this inductive approach, because we move from a specific case. You go and do your research maybe in Soweto, or in a particular community, but then later your conclusions, you would want to generalize your conclusions for the whole map of South Africa or even globally. So you are moving from a specific case, then you move to sort of a general conclusion. So that becomes inductive, right? Then moving on to the common fallacies that I've been talking about. I didn't include the fallacy of composition, but we'll see as we go along whether is it represented by one of the fallacies that are there. So a fallacy of composition is like saying when one person, right, we have done something, then you generalize it for everyone. Okay. If one South African you have stolen something, then you say all South Africans are thieves, right? So what's true for one, you make it true for the world. So that's fallacy of composition, of which we have to try to avoid it. So if you are a critical thinker, you avoid such fallacies. Then we have the straw man, misrepresenting an argument to refute it. So this is very much applicable to the issue of what we are looking at, to argumentation. So you have to misrepresent an argument because you want to refute it at the end. Okay. Right. And we have what is called ad hominem. So attacking the person, not the argument. Right. If a person, there's a paper that we once sent to a journal that I felt the reviewer was pro-Russian. But the reviewer, when he was reviewing the paper, he actually attacked us personally because we were writing a paper that was based on the issue of Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war, right? Where we were saying, okay, we were also taking a pro-Ukrainian stance as well, because we were saying Russia illegally invaded Ukraine and so on. Then we went on to mention some of the sanctions that have been applied, including that participation with withdrawal of their participation in Olympic events and so on. But when we were mentioning that, then the reviewer accused us that we are sort of propagating a propaganda on Russia and this and that. But it was not reviewing the paper or the facts that we were presenting in the paper or the arguments that we were making in the paper, but now was personally attacking us. So if you say you can't trust him, he didn't go to Oxford, right? So that's you're attacking the person. So you are not looking at what the person is bringing or the argument that the person is bringing, but you are saying you cannot trust this person. Why? Because he did not go to Oxford or he did not study at UJ, right? And under Strawman, she wants to reduce exams. She must want no accountability, right? So at the end, you are manipulating the situation. Sometimes I talk of torturing the data until it confesses. So you want the data to give you certain outcomes that supports the argument that you were making or the claims that you were making, of which is wrong. Then the slippery slope, assuming one action leads to extreme outcomes, right? One action must lead to extreme outcome. If we ban plastic straws, next it will be all plastics, right? So, I think we've seen this going over, especially on the political space, in terms of policies and so on. This kind of a slippery slope, these generalizations being made that if we do this, then it means the next we are going to do 1, 2, and 3 also follows. Then the false dilemma presenting only 2 options. You are either with us or against us. We have seen that as well, even in political circles as well, including these issues, the current issues, that we are also having as challenges as a country as well. Either you are with us or you are with the other side. Then we have the secular reasoning. The conclusion is the premise. So the law is wrong because it is illegal, right? So we also call that sort of secular, just based on secular reasoning. Then the issue of style and tone, I think those who were with us in the previous workshop that has been facilitated by Ms. Pila and Ms. Andrea before this session, I think from 10 to 12, they also talked about style and tone. I've also addressed that as well yesterday in the previous session that I had before. You have to use precise vocabulary appropriate for the discipline, avoid personal pronouns unless reflective writing is required. Write in the active voice where appropriate. So I addressed this when I was looking at clarity, conciseness, and precision in academic writing. Then eliminate vague terms like a lot, many, somehow. If you say a lot, how many is a lot? If you say, and sometimes people, you see that someone say numerous studies, but then they only show 2 studies. 2 studies numerous. So you have to be cautious of these terms that can lead to one to question, the sort of validity of the claims that you are making. Okay, then the structure of academic work. So this is normally how the work is structured. Introduction, you establish. So I had to just include a bit for us to talk a bit of a little bit about academic writing as well, because you cannot talk about this topic, issues of critical thinking, argumentation, and evidence-based writing without also referring to the issue of fallacies, as well as, most importantly, this issue of academic writing, because that is all elements, all those elements of academic writing. So introduction establishes topic, background, and thesis. Literature review surveys relevant research and identifies gaps. Methodology explains how data were collected or analyzed. Then you have analysis or discussion, where you present your findings, interpretations, and implications. Then conclusion, where you summarize arguments and proposes further research. So I think I've summarized it, that even if you are struggling with structure, then here's a structure for you, the generic structure. Then constructing academic paragraphs and avoiding plagiarism, also touched on in the previous workshop. So each paragraph should open with a topic sentence, develop a single idea, include evidence interpretation. So that is the supporting. You have to have supporting sentences backed by evidence, and end with a link to the next paragraph or overall argument. So you must link, your ideas must be linked. I always sort of encourage scholars to that when you write, put your ideas first. Okay, brainstorm ideas, put them down first. Establish the link between those ideas first before you even move on into writing. So link them. If you don't have a link, then it means those ideas are not related. So you have to link at all levels. That's how you maintain coherence or the logical flow of your text. If you don't do that, then you are just writing in islands. Let's just put it like that. Your paragraphs, your sentences, they become like islands, just standing on their own in isolation. And in academic text, you have to navigate the reader from one section to the other, from one idea to the next idea, until you deliver your ultimate message that you want to leave the reader with, right? So, in terms of citation and avoiding plagiarism, always give credit to original authors, familiarize yourself with plagiarism policies, use citation managers like EndNote. The library offers that. Even online, you can get training resources for EndNote. There are sort of tutorial videos that are also there that you can use. Follow your department's required referencing style meticulously. So those who are supposed to follow APA, then you follow the APA, including the edition of that APA. Then those who follow the UJ Harvard, then you have to follow the UJ Harvard. Failing to cite properly, it's for me, it's ignorance, because the referencing guide clearly shows you what is supposed to be done for different types of academic sources, right? Including even nowadays, they are also looking at these social media platforms, YouTube, and so on. How can you reference that? Then these are my concluding remarks. Critical thinking enables analytical depth and clarity in research. That's the first thing. Then argumentation, it is the backbone of persuasive scholarly communication. You don't have to impose argument, your claims on others, but it has to be based on logic and reasoning. Okay. Then evidence-based writing builds trust, academic credibility, and intellectual rigor. Okay. Then logical reasoning and source evaluation are essential tools for academic integrity. So it's very important that you show or demonstrate logical reasoning and also evaluate your sources. Don't just say anything that you see on the internet, then you just think that is applicable to your research. Read not everything out there, or not everything that you find in the library is of a good quality for it to be used or applied as part of the text that you are writing. Some of the theses that are in the repository, maybe they passed with 50% if it's at master's level and below, right? But still, you pass with 50%. But is that good in terms of quality? So you have to be able to evaluate the quality of any source of text that you use, and you can use that CRAP sort of framework that I've presented to you to be able to evaluate, including checking, especially particularly methods that were used, right? For one to be able to make those claims or to make particular conclusions. And with this, I bring this presentation to an end, and these are some references that I've included. I think these resources will be shared with you so that you can be able to, be able to access these references. If you need further engagement, with issues of critical thinking, with issues of argumentation, as well as evidence-based writing. Ms. Pilar, I will open now the floor for what I call an open discussion, where we can share, ask questions, and if you have any contributions, then you make your contributions to the conversation that we had and the presentation that I have just presented before you. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gabriel, for that detailed explanation. So I think you have outlined very well and give us like that explanation on what critical thinking, argumentation, and evidence-based writings are and their importance, the importance of each of this in postgraduate work. And I think that was very informative on, in all of us, because those are the very crucial skills that we need in writing our dissertations, our thesis, even our articles. So I think we really need to develop our critical thinking abilities, our argumentation abilities, and also intensively engaged in evidence-based writing. So I'll just now open the floor for questions. So everyone that wants to engage, please just raise your hand and then unmute yourself. I have enabled all the mics, so you are able to unmute yourself from your side and then ask a question. Or if you prefer to type your question in the chat box, please do so, and I will indicate then the question to Dr. Gabriel, and he can address your question. I see a hand from Sinoti. Please, can you unmute yourself, Sinoti, and ask your question?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much to Gabriel for a very valuable presentation. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We at least if this shows that the impact, that this kind of conversation is having on the scholarly community, and I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
Yes. My question, though, is on the issue of a research in which you are investigating a concept, and then and you investigate it maybe in one specific geographic area. But now, if you want to check how generalizable the concept might be, maybe to the rest of the world, then you consider using a method of case studies. My question is, what are the indicators of the adequacy of generalizability of the concept in terms of the case studies? Is it based on whether all the case studies that you would have used to check the generalizability of the concept support the concept in all the case studies, or what else? I'm just trying to understand what is adequacy in generalizing a concept from one geographic context to the rest of the world, for example. I hope my question is clear.
Yes, I get it clearly. Yeah, so I think also partly it's also based on what you have just said as well, in terms of whether those cases maybe possibly are they supporting a particular claim or not. But remember, the issue is not the claim, but because when you generalize, it doesn't mean you are only generalizing what you are claiming, whether it is that has been sort of maybe possibly supported or not supported, right? But when we talk of the issue of generalization, so like I said, partly it also include what you have just said to us that the outcomes within maybe those particular cases they have to be taken into consideration. But also an important issue is that when you are undertaking your case study, then possibly we can talk in terms of the code that you are also using, as your cases, right? As your cases. For instance, we cannot just go to one company in South Africa. Okay, let's say we are looking at the banking sector. Then we just go to one branch of FNB, for example, right? Then we go to one branch of FNB. Then we that is our case. We do our research on that particular brand as a case. Then we generalize that to the whole South Africa or to the whole banking sector in South Africa, or later alone even generalize it to the international community. So that is it one. So this is an issue. Generalization of your claims, or the validity of the claims that you have made, or the outcomes that you get in terms of results and so on. I think it's an issue that is also, you have more to do with conceptualization of your study. These are issues that you have to look at when you are still even conceptualizing your study in terms of the research design that you are following and its appropriateness in answering the questions that you are posing or that you seek answers to, and ultimately achievement of your objectives is linked to the topic under study. Thank you. I don't know if you have a follow-up question you can ask, or if you are answered well, you can just
that's
indicate
fine.
to me.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your input. That gives me some food for thought.
All right. Thank you. Okay, I see a hand from Sinoti.
No. Sorry. Let me drop my hand.
Yes.
All right. Okay, it's you. All right. Thank you.
Dr. Gabriel, just to take this question further, when we spoke about the argumentation, you've mentioned some of the processes and maybe the rebuttals as well. So maybe in this case of Mr. Sinoti that he mentioned about generalizing, so is it appropriate to say that you'll have to undergo that process also for maybe your initial claim? You need to maybe have counter arguments in different contexts as rebuttals, and then at the end of the day make like a single statement or your conclusion rather based on like your claim and the rebuttals based on different contexts, and then that's when you can maybe make a conclusion. Would I be correct if I said that?
Yeah, of course, yeah, partly, Ms. Pila, I think you are also correct in terms of that. Okay, you are looking at multiple cases. Okay, you're not just looking at one case that supports maybe possibly the claim that you want to make. So it's also important in terms of generalization as well that you can look at multiple cases. So I also maybe want to extend that instead of maybe just, but remember, in research, we are also limited because of financial constraints and so on, right? But actually, I think if one would want to generalize something for South Africa, then you have to consider cases in different geographical locations within South Africa, across also, sort of varied cultural and geographical settings within South Africa itself. So that's the thing of it, that then we even have to go on and generalize those results on a global scale, right? So remember, when you say your topic maybe is the maybe you can say maybe the impact of COVID-19 on students in South Africa, but then you just go and you look at one school. So how generalizable? I've seen cases like that where some certain studies, then when you look at them, you can actually just see that the generalization, that has been applied here, it is that sort of over, the claims have been over generalized, or the outcomes have been over generalized. So I think looking at, it's important to look at multiple cases over a wider geographical setting. Then you can be able to apply that, in terms of to generalize that to a wider, sort of a setting or a geographical location, or in terms of maybe the perspectives that you are giving. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarity, Dr. Gabriel. So we have a comment from Caroline, and she says, Dr. Monyara, thank you for this informative presentation. I look forward to being a critical thinker for my research. And considering your expertise, may I ask if you are open for consultations? My research interests are on African trade and governance. Yes, you can book a consultation with Dr. Gabriel. I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell you how you can book a session with him. Dr. Gabriel?
Yeah. Yes, it's true. As the other research capacity development unit, we also offer research writing consultations where you can get assistance. Sort of our slots are usually 1 hour, but on different days we have sort of experts from different across all the faculties of the university. I'm also a research writing consultant as well, but for the next 2 months, I think I'm not on the schedule. But I will share with you a link that you can use to be able to access, these writing, consultations, where you can make a booking to any consultant of your choice. Then there's a form that you fill, on that system, where you are able to upload the document that you are working on, and also provide the help, the sort of a statement stating the level of assistance that you expect. So let me just look for that link, and just post it on the chat box. Okay, so let me. I think I'm on the link. So this is the link that you can use to make a booking. So you will see the ones that are available. But if you want to come on site, you can book with Dr. Lorenzo. You will see him there. So he's the one who is on site. And usually our offices are not far from each other. So if you need me to collaborate in the session, then I can be able to also collaborate in the session. Thank you.
Thank you,
Miss-
Dr. Gabriel. And yes, there is a link on the chat that Dr. Gabriel posted, so you can use that to book a consultation, and then have the draft for the document that you're working on, and then have a consultation with our writing consultants. Thank you for that. And we have a comment again from Laurent, and the comment is saying, just wanted to thank Mr. Gabriel for a very well and detailed presentation. The information will be helpful and useful. Definitely, it will be useful to everyone. And Caroline says thank you, but I'm particularly referring to your views on intra-trade.
Yes, of course, Caroline. Yeah. You if you make a booking, you can book with Dr. Lorenzo. Then when you come for the session, I can be able to collaborate in the session. So of course, I am available to assist you with questions maybe that you might be having regarding the issue of intra-trade. Could it be intra-regional, intra-industry, or the level that you are analyzing it? So I am available to do that, and I'll be able to assist together with the writing consultant that you would have booked. But most preferably, Dr. Lorenzo David, because it's the one who is on site. So I'm able to go to his office when you come. Then we can have sort of a joint consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. Do we have any other questions? I'll just give this last opportunity for those who want to raise their hands, unmute yourself and then ask, or you can type your question or comment on the chat box. And also, just to remind you that there is a feedback form on the chat. Can you request that you please complete the feedback survey for us to gain some insight on this workshop? And yes, please complete the feedback form that is on the chat. Dr. Gabriel, thank you very much. When it comes to reading articles, evaluating sources, sometimes it can for like new researchers or academics, sometimes it can be overwhelming and you don't know when and how to start. So I'm particularly thankful to you for giving us like a strategy of evaluating sources, the one that you call the CREP. So I think we're all gonna take that and use it to our advantage. So thank you very much for that. And for this session as a whole, we have learned a lot. And it is now up to each and every one of us to try to develop our critical thinking abilities, our argumentation skills, and thoroughly engage in the evidence-based writing. So we thank you so much for this informative session that you have given, and your insights are very much valuable. Thank you very much, and I think all the participants will agree with me. So in the absence of questions and comments, I think we can call it a day. We can end the session. Any final remarks, Dr. Gabriel?
Mr. Pila, I also want to just thank the participants for taking their time, to be with us in this session. I think it was more of an engaging session. We have interacted and we have shared a lot of insights, that I think will go a long way in trying to enhance the quality of the research that you are doing, or any piece of academic text that you are writing. And with this, I give you the green light to end the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see someone who's typing on the chat, so I'm just gonna verify if we have any last comments. So we do have from Dion, who says, thank you for the conversation on critical thinking and reasoning. It was very informative and enriching. Thank you for that. And we are happy that we all benefited. Yes, we are happy that we all benefited from the session. So in the absence of any questions or comment, I think we can close the session and have a great day further.
Thank you, Ms. Pila.